understand we're going to have a discussion today about the telltale signs of needing a service catalog. And the there are basically three questions that we seem to find over and over again that underpin the business driver side of what spawns an interest in exploring what a service catalog can do to benefit the organization. By all accounts, service quality is where the discussion starts. Wouldn't you agree, Wade?
Absolutely, Adrian. I was jumping in. I was going to say one of the things that our customers are coming at us saying is, my boss just came to me today and said, service quality in IT needs to improve. I've looked at these surveys, internally for our organization, and the executives or different directors are complaining that they're not getting the quality they want, and or they don't even know what the service is. And we hear this over and over again from customers. Can you help with this? Can you help with this issue? And one of the reasons we're having this webcast this morning talking is because this is something that we often come back and say, there's a great plug-in tool that will help you solve the issue with Biomni. So, Adrian, can you talk a little bit about the service quality and what you do with that?
Sure will. Yeah, and there's no question that's really where the discussion starts, because we have to remember that these same managers that are asking that question, they very likely go home at night to their families where they're also, the surrogate IT manager there, right? And I think a lot of us in that situation, we look at our kids and we say, by golly, they're self-provisioning almost everything. They can launch a Google service with ease. They can buy anything from Amazon, and really, it's a fairly well-run household. And yet, you come back to the workplace where people arguably spend the majority of their time, and I think you just hit the nail on the head, Wade, that there's far less convenience in terms of self-service. And even if you have self-service capability across the various facets of your IT infrastructure, one of the things that we often find that drives the confusion is that there's just too many choices. I mean, how many portals can the customer really handle? Now, one of the things that I would like to insert before we jump all over the IT organization for failing to deliver quality service is that we also have to understand that there is a little difference in the problem here, because no doubt about it, experiences like Apple, Amazon, Google have really raised the bar with respect to what self-service and what the customer experience is ideally sought after. But the fact is that when you're oftentimes requesting things out of IT, you're not doing things for discrete goods and services. Sometimes you are, but quite often you're actually requesting things that are backstopped by broader processes. I mean, the classic example is employee start, right? And those scenarios there where you're actually requesting, even though you're saying, I want to start a new employee, what you're really requesting is a sundry of different things and a sundry of different services. And those things can be highly varied, both in terms of their composition as well as how they're fulfilled. So I think it's also an important point to say that IT is contending with a different problem, but the challenge is that the customer, the user, has a benchmark from their own consumer experience of how easy it ought to be. And of course, Apple really just, I think sets the bar as high as it's ever been set. So that's the scenario now that IT has to contend with, and it's a tough challenge. It is a different problem, but nevertheless, the expectation doesn't go away. Wouldn't you agree, Wade?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's easy to say, well, we can do these things as you described, Amazon.cloud. The example I use is my kids with their Xbox Live and their Xbox, and they just, it's almost like people, our consumers now in our organizations and our companies expect it to be that easy as my kids with their Xbox Live account. And not everybody can appreciate that analogy, but I'm telling you, if you have kids, you know what that's like. And it just isn't that simple. There are tools like Biomni that can definitely make it easier, but the things that we deal with aren't consumer level items. So we have to figure out ways to bring the solutions to the customer, like with tools with Biomni, which gets me excited about what you guys are doing, but also make it easy for the IT administrator.
So the questions that we ask are, can we simplify it somehow? We clearly have to deal with the aggregation topic that we've been talking about, because you're right, it's not the same problem. The experience is ideally sought to be the same, but it's not the same type of content. And of course, in so doing, if you're going to aggregate it, it means by default that you're talking about trying to leverage that massive investment that already exists in the IT infrastructure. So what we believe is needed to address this is a storefront for IT. And we've, by the way, seen this type of phenomena before, where this type of complexity had to be reduced into something more simplified and aggregated. I mean, that's really what storefronts do. They simplify and they aggregate what otherwise is a pretty complex behind-the-scenes set of processes if you were to basically, by comparison, invite customers into your factory floor. And if you think about IT today, it really is the equivalent of a modern factory analogy, because there's lots of moving parts, there's lots of different functions and subfunctions, and yet what's produced really is services to the business, right? But up until now, the technology that's been serving IT has been predominantly consumed and aimed towards IT professionals, factory users in this analogy. So what the service catalog concept really does is it sort of draws a line. It makes a distinction that this is a different type of audience. This is your user audience. This is your customer audience. And we feel that no different than what CRM had to do for the ERP marketplace, the service catalog, by same analogy, does for the IT infrastructure. It's a storefront. Okay? And we spoke earlier that inside that storefront, it's not just requesting discrete things, you know, a book or a ticket on an airline, etc. A lot of times it's that plus a lot more. The fact is that the factory that we were just talking about is really controlling a whole different set of delivery mechanisms. There is no such thing as one tool that controls all of the IT universe. It's an ecosystem. So the storefront, by definition, even though you're trying to present something as simplified as what people get in their consumer experience, it really has to aggregate a whole lot of content, make it simplified in its presentation, yet it has to be able to then manage the orchestration of how those requests are split about and fulfilled in a very complex behind-the-scenes scenario. And of course, it has tools in IT that it can draw upon, but what I guess I'm trying to say is it's not as simple as just simply putting a web front end on top of your various IT systems. All right, there's a lot of intelligence that has to go into that storefront. And I would further add that there's one additional big difference between the way requests, if you want to call them that, are made through a service catalog for IT. When you're dealing in the consumer arena, you buy something off Amazon, really the only approval that's necessary is, can you pay for it? You've got your credit card on file, one-click purchase, you're done. But in the case of a service catalog in the business environment, quite often the requests that you're raising will themselves invoke fairly complex and very important business approval processes that actually even precede it getting into the IT factory. And those approvals are particularly important when you contemplate our next telltale sign of a service catalog need, and that's in the area of software compliance.
Yeah, this is an area that it's I mean, if you talk about for ITS, the number one area our customers have come to us and just said, you know, we need help. We've either cleaned up a mess, meaning they got audited and they went through and did the hard manual process of cleaning up a mess, or we have a mess that we haven't cleaned up. The classic example in this slide is so true. It's showing a garage, but I've seen IT back rooms just filled with monitors and servers and storage units and the whole storage arrays and the whole bit, and they have no idea what it is. That's not even to talk about the software. And this is an issue for most organizations, how to stay compliant, and that's one of the things that gets me excited about the Biomni tool. And what we're talking about today is, you know, we have a real process and a way to interject process and tools in order to do that quickly. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. We hear it this way quite a bit, is that organizations sometimes they learn about the necessity of the front office by a hard lesson learned by going through a software audit, and they realize if they have a tool like Semantic Alteris suite installed, they understand that, you know what, we understand what's in our environment, messy as it may be, to your point, and we actually understand that we could even clean it up. We can certainly identify, underutilized software, and we can reclaim it automatically. That's great. But the question that gets asked once they get pinged with a software audit that, hopefully doesn't, trigger out-of-pocket consequence, is once we go through this exercise of cleaning out our garage, what prevents it from getting dirty again? That's the question. And so the front office is a necessary component to solve that particular problem. You've got the Alteris suite on the back end that absolutely, if properly implemented, can monitor what's installed, what's being used, and who has it. But what about how it got there in the first place? And how do you prevent it from getting back there in the first place if it was never authorized? So this front office scenario is very important for serving as a gating mechanism for the ability to control any asset entering into the environment. In fact, Wade, we've even seen beyond software compliance organizations fail operational audits, that are related to their, to their other, for example, SOX compliance. And, this concept of being able to demonstrate control of assets or anything entering into the environment is just it's a foundational governance point. But it certainly has its most pronounced, a pronounced effect in the area of software request management.
Yeah, I use the example of hardware stacking up, but you're so right. That's just a show. It's kind of like someone who's sick. You see a small symptom, and you don't realize that there's something much larger underneath that's bigger than that, and that's exactly the same. Hardware being stacked up is just a symptom of there's bigger problems, and software is the most costly, and in some ways, believe it or not, easiest thing to fix once you start using the right tools.
That's right. And fundamentally, what the service catalog capability enables is an organization to institute a request management discipline. Software is, if anything, the one type of asset category that really requires such a thing to be instituted, again, for the problems in the scenarios we were just speaking about a moment ago. But what does this mean? It means that the job doesn't just end with the discipline of cataloging your stuff, all right? Cataloging what you have is important, and clearly presenting that in a consumable fashion in terms of how business users wish to consume it, especially if it's bundled or packaged or even labeled differently. That's all part and parcel of what the front office does. But beyond that really is where the additional value comes in with respect to connecting back into IT, and that is that certain services that are published become requestable. All right, that's the second step of the discipline. So by that, you have a service, you present it. Certain things of that service or certain services may be requestable, made actionable. I spoke a moment ago that one of the big differences between IT self-service and consumer self-service is, depending upon what's requested, you may or may not have a fairly complex approval sub-process to contend with. And by this, I mean business approval. It could also require technical approval, right? That would be as fundamental as the case of, I want this thing on my box, and does my box have enough capacity to run that thing? So the technical approval and the business approval, financial approval, all of those things, to the extent that they can be automated, not always. I mean, most of the time, approval really involves human touch, but what we can do is we can ensure that the approval step happens. This is probably one of the biggest reasons why the garage gets dirty again, is because there is no such gate for approving software, or at least even knowing that it's being requested. A lot of times what happens is that it just basically gets requested by virtue of a self-service click and install. That's a welcomed opportunity for that garage to get dirty again. All right. Now, obviously, if you're going to go to all the trouble of fronting this and getting all the approvals, et cetera, it goes without saying you would have the expectation that the automation would further extend to enabling the fulfillment. Well, one of the things that we see quite frequently in the semantic environment is that there's a lot of different ways you can deal with automated software, ranging from conventional deployment server mechanism to streaming. Well, again, that front office agnostic architecture allows you to aggregate both sets of content and make the fulfillment occur seamlessly without really the user having to be contemplating, well, do I go to the, do I go to portal number 1 for this piece of software, or do I go to portal number 2? Okay, so multiple mechanisms for delivery are all encompassed in this fulfillment mechanism. And then finally, we believe it's really important to measure this, because if the front office isn't measuring user satisfaction, going back to that argument of service quality, what is? It goes without saying that if you think about SLA management in the conventional sense, it's really it's really measuring the behind-the-scenes processes inside of IT. So what we provide is an ability to take any of these catalog services and measure their fulfillment from the business perspective. All right, so that in summary is the discipline that we feel has to be has to be in place in order to keep that garage from getting dirty again. The ability to catalog, the ability to request, approve, fulfill, and measure.
So, one thing that I want to make sure we're absolutely clear on to people on the call, and we, here at ITS, we have a lot of legacy Altiris customers that have been working with ITS for years and years. A few new ones as well, of course. We always have new customers, but some people have been working with us for a lot of years. And I can tell you one of our number one requests we get over the years is, how do we do this inside of Altiris? There's always been a framework to set this up and build this. It's very manual. It's not automated. It takes a lot of work from the end customer or the consultants, and that's what ITS has done. But we get very excited and are excited about what we're talking about today, because what Biomni can do is basically a snap-on or snap-in to Altiris. And for us and for our customers, that's exciting because it doesn't take all the work away. There's still some work. And when you talk about process, you always have to tie your processes to the tool or vice versa in some way. But Biomni makes things possible that our customers have been asking about for years and years and years. And so when you talk about all these things, Adrian, this is it's exciting because we talked about it for a lot of years. But it's even more exciting when you understand that we're not saying this is something you could do if you put a lot of hard work in. This is something that's ready to snap in today.
That's correct. Yeah, I think one of the most compelling examples of that, in fact, is this topic of software request management. I'll highlight something real specific here just to kind of echo your point, Wade, is that this ability to, at the time of request, verify the availability of the license entitlement. Okay. Now we all know that if you're using Altiris and if you have AMS, you've got a great repository there that triangulates quite an assortment of valuable information. The question I would ask is, the end user, however, who's requesting that next copy of Visio, and let's say it's not under an enterprise agreement for sake of argument, how does he or she know what they're entitled to? Or more importantly, how does the manager know if they're even entitled to that additional software from a licensing perspective? If they're a really squared away organization, they'll probably get on the phone and maybe call up the Altiris desk for that information. But typically, the business person who's making the approval for the request, not always is an Altiris user. So the problem is they don't have access to the very information that guides their ability to say yes or no. Yeah. So one of the things we do, I think that's very, very easy to illustrate when the software is demoed, is that we actually pull in a variety of information from Altiris real-time behind the scenes into the context of the request. So for example, when somebody's requesting Visio, the license data for that particular title is pulled in dynamically from Altiris, and it's just embedded into the request as if the user had the ability to magically key it in. And then that business approval that we were talking about automating, it takes that information into account. So the real value here is by being able to integrate real time into the back office, you're not only talking about automating the ability to trigger the fulfillment, we think it's equally important to enrich the approval steps by virtue of bringing and having access to all of this asset data, which is in the back office environment, but not necessarily made accessible in the front office. So it's important that, to your point, Wade, that the systems have this bi-directional integration. And I think that's one of the reasons why we've been selected in this type of partnership, both with ITS and with Semantic on a broader scale, is because this integration comes to you out of box. It's part of the solution pre-built. And it doesn't stop with just Semantic or Alteryx. We have adapters for a wide variety of things, including a wide range of common cloud services as well.
That really brings us to our third question, and this is something that I think IT gets asked over and over again, and it's since 1999 or 2000, whenever the tech bubble burst for your organization, to those on the phone, and I'd say for us it was about year 2000. That's when the funnel of money to IT really slowed down. And since then, for the last 12 years, or you could say 13 or 11, however many years for your organization, there's been an ongoing financial request from the CFO or whoever within the organization saying, how can we reduce costs both in IT, outside of IT, and what it costs to deliver IT services. And I know this is something Biomni has got a history of doing and something you guys focus on. So do you want to talk about what you can do to help with that, and the subject I think everybody's really got on their mind?
Yeah, you bet, Wade. I think it goes without saying that any solution that you bring into an organization these days has to pass this litmus test. Yeah. So, for one, getting back to this request management, discipline, the requesting and the approving and the fulfilling. The fact is that to the extent those things are even done, you're certainly reducing at very minimum soft cost exposure, right? I mean, we've seen so many value propositions of our solution written around just the software request management process in and of itself, because by virtue of knowing that you're going to keep that garage clean, you substantially reduce the exposure for in excess of installations and basically falling out of compliance, right? So there's a huge amount of soft cost exposure. We also believe that by enabling all of those business approval steps, which often are very much the cobbler's child in the process, yet they're the most important thing. But if an organization says, fine, we're going to bite the bullet and we're going to make sure that we rigorously now vet our requests before we just blast them into the factory and get them all fulfilled with all this great technology we have. If an organization tries to do that manually, and if they compare the benefit of having self-service, automate these steps, the cost, the cost reduction operationally is fairly easy to calculate. One of the things that Biomni's recently done, and we've talked a lot about Alteryx in this call, but with respect to the semantic community, we've also enabled, for example, self-service to net backup, and just the ability for users to self-serve their own backup restoration requests. And mind you, some organizations just don't want that to be done willy-nilly. They also want to have an approval step involved, or at the very least a notification step through that approval process, so that proper parties in IT are notified that, hey, we're having a restoration occur and it might be a large file. We might want to basically schedule this at a different time of day, et cetera, et cetera. But this self-service for net backup has had amazing amount of take on just because of the reduction of calls to the help desk when users can self-service something of that sort. So anytime you can automate the repetitive requests, things that you're going to have to do, but you can not only automate them from a self-service standpoint, but also enrich them from an approval and notification standpoint, and fulfillment standpoint, that's usually going to reduce your operational costs depending upon your entry point for all of this. Now, something else is ownership costs. We see a lot of organizations that have very aggressively attempted to build a lot of what we're talking about today by virtue of employing something like the semantic workflow. And there's no question, it's a very, very powerful tool. And quite honestly, we use it extensively ourselves because some of the deep plumbing that you can do with the workflow solution with respect to inside the semantic ecosystem integration is very, very powerful, no question. But when you try to build front office capability using the workflow tool, and I think this illustration says it all, the workflow tool is in effect something that automates and works in a linear fashion. It's in effect taking a flow chart and automating it. And so the more types of conditions and more types of if then type of processing you have to throw into that, by natural consequence, the workflow is going to continue to grow and grow and grow. So imagine for a second that if you took the time, forgot about your consciousness of cost, and said, by golly, we're going to build it. We would contend that you might build it, but you're going to definitely maintain it, because every time a business rule changes, you're going to have to go in and you're going to have to basically deal with it with inside a tool versus an application. All right. And we'll set aside the issues when you're dealing with a large multinational that has multilingual issues, multi-currency issues. It just gets more and more and more complex. The bottom line is, we believe that the front office has a very important place in this overall ecosystem. It is basically the analog to the factory. All right. And you can absolutely buy it and you can simplify it. So in the case of being able to, at the very least, offload your semantic workflows with the approval steps and the presentation of the front office chores, again, that request management discipline, this will absolutely simplify the need to build complex workflows. Will it replace workflow? Is it designed to replace workflow? No, it's designed to offload it. Front office versus back office. Workflow solution remains designated then to handle the the mixed orchestration across multiple systems, all that back office ecosystem management that it does so well. Okay, so again, operational cost reduction through automation and self-service, soft cost exposure reduction by virtue of keeping that garage clean, and cost of ownership reduction by the ability to reduce the complexity of what you would otherwise have to build. The bottom line is that we think that we can decrease your time to value, get your value to the organization faster. We feel that we can increase the performance of the workflows that you are developing because we're simplifying them. And if you basically offload the front office to a front office tool, you virtually have reduced or not eliminated your maintenance requirements related to those parts of the process. So that, in a nutshell, is what front office does. We're very, very proud to be a part of the semantic value chain. We are a certified third-party partner. We also have a great relationship with ITS, who's our preferred systems integrator here in North America. We believe, in summary, that the front office is the single most important step in supporting what Semantic promotes as their revolution from device-centric to user-centric management. The mission of the front office is to professionalize, it is to aggregate and to modernize the business user experience with IT and other internal services. So we try to reduce this both from a risk and a cost standpoint to prevent you from failing those compliance audits, keeping the garage clean, increasing your service quality by giving the end user an experience, at least, that behind the scenes might be complex, but from the standpoint of the user, the front office is as close as possible to the commerce or style of consumption that they readily enjoy in their home consumer environments. So with that, I will turn it back over to our friends here at ITS with any closing remarks. And
Adrian, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to go through this, and hopefully we'll have you guys on a webcast in the near future. Thank you.